The fluorescent lights of Terminal C hummed a tired, monotonous tune, a soundtrack for the end of the world, or at least the end of Lena Washington's world. It was 3 in the morning. The air tasted of stale coffee and disinfectant. Lena's reflection in the polished marble floor was a ghost she barely recognized. A weary woman in a faded blue uniform, her shoulders slumped under a weight far heavier than the industrial cleaning cart she pushed. She was tired. She was hungry. She was alone. Her mother, Eleanor, had been gone for 6 months. The grief was a physical presence, a cold stone lodged in her chest that made it hard to breathe. Eleanor had been a nurse, a woman whose hands were perpetually busy healing, whose voice was a balm of calm reassurance. Her final words to Lena, whispered in a sterile hospital room that smelled of rubbing alcohol and finality, had been simple. Kindness, Lena. It's the one thing you can always afford to give. Lena clung to those words, like a life raft in a churning sea of debt and despair. It was hard to be kind when your stomach was a hollow ache. It was hard to be kind when the eviction notice on your apartment door felt like a screaming accusation. It was hard to be kind when your bank account displayed a number so small it felt like a joke. $7.32. Enough for a loaf of bread and maybe a can of soup. Not enough to silence the gnawing anxiety that kept her awake during the few hours she wasn't working one of her 2 soul-crushing jobs. She pushed the cart past the darkened storefronts. Designer handbags, expensive watches, perfumes that cost more than her monthly rent. It was a different universe, separated from hers by a thin pane of glass. She was on the outside, always on the outside, cleaning the smudges left by people who lived in the sun. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a cruel, insistent vibration. She already knew what it was. Another automated text from her landlord. Rent past due. Final notice. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Final notice. What came after final? The cart's wheels squeaked, a pathetic rhythmic complaint that echoed her own silent screams. She stopped near the entrance to the Elysian Air first-class lounge, a place of hushed tones and leather chairs she was only ever allowed to enter with a mop and bucket after the last pampered guest had departed. The automatic glass doors hissed open and shut, offering glimpses of a world of complimentary champagne and quiet dignity. Her own dignity felt shredded. Her uniform was clean but worn thin at the elbows. Her shoes, the most comfortable pair she could afford, had a hole in the sole that welcomed the cold of the floor. She could feel a blister forming on her heel, a small, persistent pain that added to the mountain of her misery. She deserved more than this. Her mother had worked her fingers to the bone to ensure Lena could have a better life. But a series of misfortunes. Her mother's long illness, the staggering medical bills, a layoff from her previous job, had conspired to drag her down, down, down into this suffocating pit. She pulled out the remainder of her dinner from her bag, half a turkey sandwich on dry bread. It was her only food until her meager paycheck cleared tomorrow. Maybe. Sometimes it was late. Her stomach rumbled in protest, a loud, embarrassing growl. Just as she was about to take a bite, she saw him, a flicker of movement near a service corridor. A small, scruffy, stray cat, its fur matted, its ribs showing. It looked at her with wide, fearful eyes, the same kind of desperation she saw in her own reflection. Frank, another cleaner on the night shift, shuffled past. He was a man whose spirit had been sandblasted away by years of thankless labor. He saw her looking at the cat. "Don't feed it," he grunted, not breaking his stride. "Just encourages them. They're pests." Lena looked from the cat to the sandwich in her hand. $7.32, an eviction notice, a hollow stomach. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Kindness is the one thing you can always afford to give. She broke off a piece of the turkey, a significant piece, and knelt down. She placed it on the floor, a silent offering. "Here you go," she whispered. The cat darted forward, snatched the meat, and disappeared back into the shadows. Lena felt a pang of hunger, but it was overshadowed by a tiny, warm spark in her chest. For a moment, she wasn't just a victim of her circumstances, she was a giver. That small act of defiance against her own misery seemed to shift something in the air. As she stood up, her eyes were drawn back to the entrance of the first-class lounge. The doors hissed open again, not for a wealthy traveler, but for an elderly man who stumbled out, looking pale and disoriented. He was dressed in simple, almost shabby clothes, a rumpled cardigan, worn trousers, scuffed shoes. He clutched his chest, his face a mask of pain. He looked lost, vulnerable. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a small bottle of pills. His hands were shaking so violently that the bottle slipped from his grasp, skittering across the polished floor and spilling its precious contents. The man gave a small cry of despair and leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. People walked by. A businessman in a crisp suit glanced at the man, then looked away, his face a mask of distaste. A young couple laughed, steering their luggage cart around him as if he were a piece of trash. No one stopped. No one helped. To them, he was invisible. Or worse, an inconvenience, an eyesore in their pristine world. Frank reappeared, pushing his own cart. He saw the scene and shook his head, a grim set to his mouth. He gestured toward the man with his chin. "See that?" he muttered to Lena. "Probably drunk or high. Stay away from it, kid. You try to help, and they'll blame you when his wallet goes missing. It's not our problem. We're here to clean floors, not people." His words were a cold dose of reality. He was right. Getting involved was a risk. Her supervisor, a man with a perpetually sour expression, had a zero-tolerance policy for fraternizing with passengers. She could lose her job. The job that was the only thing standing between her and the street. The $7.32 in her account screamed at her to be sensible, to turn away, to mind her own business. But then she saw the man's face, the sheer terror in his eyes, the way his hand trembled as he tried and failed to reach for the scattered pills. She didn't see a drunk. She didn't see a vagrant. She saw a human being in agony. She saw her father, in his final days, struggling for breath. She saw her mother's patients, their faces etched with pain, looking for a hand to hold. Kindness, Lena. The choice was no choice at all. In that moment, her mother's legacy was more powerful than her fear. She abandoned her cart and rushed to the man's side. "Sir? Sir, are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. He looked at her, his eyes clouded with pain. "My pills. My heart," he gasped. "It's okay. Just breathe. I'm here. I'll help you." Lena's instincts took over. She knelt, her knees cracking on the cold marble, and quickly gathered the small white pills, her fingers nimble. She checked the label on the bottle. Nitroglycerin. She knew what it was. Her mother had explained it. For angina. For heart pain. This was serious. "You need to put one under your tongue," she instructed calmly, her voice echoing the steady tone her mother had always used in a crisis. She helped the man slide down the wall into a sitting position and gently placed one of the pills into his hand. He shakily put it in his mouth. "Water," he rasped. I need water. The nearest vending machine was 20 feet away. She glanced at it. A bottle of water was $2.50, a third of her entire net worth. The absurdity of the thought almost made her laugh. She didn't hesitate. She ran to the machine, her worn shoes slapping against the floor, fumbled with her debit card, and prayed it wouldn't be declined. The transaction went through. The bottle clattered into the dispenser. Relief washed over her. She rushed back and helped the man take a small sip. He leaned his head back against the wall, his eyes closed, his breathing still ragged but starting to even out. Lena stayed with him, one hand resting lightly on his shoulder, a small point of human contact in the cold, indifferent terminal. She was no longer a cleaner, she was a caregiver. She was her mother's daughter. And that was when the real storm arrived. A woman emerged from the lounge, moving with the sharp, predatory grace of a hawk. She was tall, rail-thin, and dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than Lena earned in 3 months. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe, perfect chignon. Her face was a sculpture of disdain. Diamonds glittered at her ears and throat. She stopped dead, her perfectly plucked eyebrows rising in theatrical horror. Her gaze swept over the scene, the disheveled old man on the floor, the black cleaner in her worn uniform kneeling beside him. Her lips curled into a sneer. What is this? Her voice was a whip crack, sharp and loud, cutting through the quiet hum of the terminal. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Lena looked up, startled. "This man is unwell, ma'am. I'm just helping him." The woman, Caroline Preston, ignored her completely, as if she were a piece of furniture. She addressed the empty air around Lena. "Security! I need security over here now! There is filth in the first-class lounge!" Her voice dripped with a venom that was breathtaking in its intensity. She took a step closer, wrinkling her nose as if she'd encountered a foul odor. "I cannot believe this. This is supposed to be an exclusive space. What is this vagrant doing here? And why is the staff fraternizing with him? Get them out. Get them both out of my sight." Lena felt a hot flush of shame and anger creep up her neck. "Ma'am, he's having a medical emergency. He needed his medication." Caroline finally deigned to look at her, her eyes scanning Lena's uniform with contempt. "And you're a doctor now, are you? You're a cleaner. Your job is to be silent and invisible, not to bring street trash into a private lounge." She turned her attention to the old man, who was now watching the scene with wide, weary eyes. "And you," she spat. "You should be ashamed of yourself. This is a place for respectable people." A large, burly security guard named Greg arrived, his expression bored until he saw Caroline Preston. He recognized wealth and power when he saw it. His posture straightened immediately. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" "Yes, there is a problem," Caroline shrieked, pointing a long, manicured finger at Lena. "This person dragged this homeless man in here. She was probably trying to rob him. I want them removed. Now. I pay a fortune for my membership here, and I will not have it contaminated by the lower classes." The accusation hit Lena like a physical blow. Rob him? She had just spent her last dollars to buy him water. The injustice of it stole her breath. "That's not true," Lena stammered, getting to her feet. "He collapsed. I was helping him." Greg the guard didn't even look at her. His focus was entirely on Caroline. He saw an expensive suit and an air of authority. He saw Lena's worn uniform and her dark skin. In his mind, the calculation was simple. He knew who to believe. He knew who mattered. "All right, you, let's go," he said, his voice a low growl as he turned to Lena. He reached out and grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bicep like a vice. The grip was hard, punishing. It was meant to hurt. It was meant to humiliate. "Let go of me," Lena said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Tell it to my supervisor," Greg sneered, starting to pull her away from the old man and toward the exit. "Come on, out." The scene had attracted an audience. People were stopping, their curiosity piqued by the drama. Phones were raised, their small red lights blinking as they recorded her degradation. No one stepped forward. No one spoke up for her. They were a silent jury, watching her be condemned without a trial. The weight of their stares was crushing. She felt small, powerless, and utterly alone. Her face burned with a shame so profound, it felt like it was scorching her from the inside out. The old man tried to speak. "Wait, she helped me," he said, his voice still weak. Caroline waved a dismissive hand. "He's probably her accomplice. Just get them out of here!" Greg gave Lena's arm a vicious tug, pulling her off balance. He was dragging her. A security guard was dragging her through the terminal like a criminal. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and angry. She would not let them see her cry. She lifted her chin, her mother's strength a tiny ember in the cold darkness of her despair. She met the blank, pitiless eyes of the crowd, her gaze a silent accusation. And then she was dragged out of sight, into a small, windowless security office. Her supervisor, a harried man named Miller, arrived a few minutes later. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He didn't care. He had received a complaint from a platinum-level member. That was all that mattered. "Washington, you're fired," he said, his tone flat. "I've told you people not to engage with the passengers. You caused a disturbance. Clean out your locker. Your final check will be ready in an hour." And that was it. No discussion, no appeal. She was dismissed, discarded. The job she hated, the job that barely paid her bills, was gone. The last frayed thread holding her life together had snapped. She walked to the staff locker room in a daze, the guard's fingerprints a livid bruise on her arm. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. She slowly changed out of the uniform, folding it neatly for the last time. It felt like shedding a skin. Who was she now? A fired cleaner, a grieving daughter, an almost homeless woman with $4.82 to her name. An hour later, she collected a small envelope from the HR office. Inside was her final paycheck, a pathetic amount, and something else. Tucked behind the check was a stiff, elegant piece of cardstock, an airline ticket, first class. Flight 724 to San Francisco, departing in 2 hours. Her name, Lena Washington, was printed in crisp, clear letters. She stared at it, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. A first-class ticket? It was a mistake. It had to be. But her name was right there. Was this some kind of cruel joke? A final twist of the knife? She looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and laugh at her. But the office was empty. She had nothing. Nowhere to go. Her apartment would be locked by morning. She had no job, no prospects, just a ticket to a city she'd never seen. A wild, desperate idea began to form in her mind. Why not? What was left to lose? Maybe this was a sign. A bizarre, inexplicable door opening in the wall that had just closed in on her. With a surge of reckless abandon, she walked out of the office, through the terminal she had just been fired from, and headed toward the security checkpoint. She was going to use the ticket. Walking into the first-class cabin of Flight 724 felt like stepping onto another planet. The seats were like plush, leather thrones. The air was quiet, serene. Flight attendants with warm, genuine smiles offered champagne and orange juice. Lena, in her simple jeans and t-shirt, felt profoundly out of place. She clutched her worn backpack to her chest like a shield and found her seat, 2B, a spacious pod by the window. She sank into the soft leather, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She was so absorbed in the surreal experience that she didn't notice the other passengers boarding. Not until she heard that voice. That sharp, venomous voice that was now seared into her memory. "You have got to be kidding me!" Lena's head snapped up. There, standing in the aisle, was Caroline Preston. Her face, which had been a mask of triumph an hour ago, was now twisted into a gargoyle of disbelief and fury. She was pointing directly at Lena. "You, again!" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the quiet cabin. Every head turned. "How in God's name did you get in here? Did you steal that ticket? Is there no escape from the dregs of society?" A flight attendant hurried over. "Ma'am, is there a problem?" "Yes, there is a problem," Caroline bellowed. "This woman does not belong here. She is a fired airport cleaner who was accosting people in the lounge. She needs to be removed from this aircraft immediately. I will not fly with trash." The flight attendant, a young woman with a deer-in-the-headlights expression, looked from Caroline's furious face to Lena's stricken one. "Miss, is this your assigned seat?" she asked Lena timidly. Lena could only nod, her throat tight. She held up her boarding pass, her hand shaking. Caroline scoffed. "It's forged! Or she stole it! I demand you call security! Get her off this plane!" The situation was escalating. Other passengers were murmuring, casting suspicious glances at Lena. The narrative was being written for them by this loud, confident, wealthy woman. Lena was the intruder, the problem. The shame she had felt in the lounge returned, 1,000 times more intense. Here, in this confined space, there was no escape from the judgment in their eyes. The flight attendant, clearly out of her depth, spoke into her headset. A moment later, a familiar, dreaded figure appeared at the front of the cabin. It was Greg, the security guard. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Lena, and a cruel, triumphant smirk played on his lips. "Her again?" he said, his voice full of false weariness. He walked down the aisle, his presence filling the narrow space. "Ma'am," he said to Lena, his voice loud for everyone to hear. "I thought you were told to leave airport property." "I have a ticket," Lena whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't care what you have," he snarled, leaning in close. "You're coming with me. Now." He reached for her again. The same rough, humiliating grip. He grabbed her arm and pulled, yanking her out of the luxurious seat and into the aisle. The force was so sudden she stumbled, her backpack falling to the floor. He started to drag her, just as he had before. Past the rows of silent, watching faces, past the judgment, the whispers, the averted eyes. He was dragging her toward the open door of the plane, toward the cold night, toward the complete and utter annihilation of her last shred of dignity. Tears finally welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. This was it. This was rock bottom. Stop. The voice was quiet, but it cut through the cabin with the authority of a thunderclap. It was not loud, but it commanded absolute attention. Every head turned. Greg froze, his hand still clamped on Lena's arm. Slowly, from a seat in the front row that Lena hadn't even noticed, The elderly man from the lounge stood up. Mr. Elias Vance. He was no longer pale and gasping. He stood tall, his posture erect. The shabby cardigan seemed to transform, to hang on him with an air of quiet power. His eyes, which had been clouded with pain, were now sharp and clear as ice. They were fixed on the security guard. "I said," Mr. Vance repeated, his voice dangerously soft, "let go of her, now." Greg stared, momentarily confused. "Sir, this woman is—" "I know exactly who this woman is," Mr. Vance interrupted. "She is my guest, and you are laying your hands on her. On my aircraft." "My aircraft." The words hung in the air. Caroline Preston let out a derisive laugh. "Your aircraft? Don't be ridiculous. You're just some homeless old man she's latched onto. Don't you try to interfere." Just then, the cockpit door opened. The pilot emerged, a woman with silver hair cut in a sharp, no-nonsense style and captain's bars gleaming on her shoulders. Her name tag read E. Rostova. Her eyes surveyed the scene with a practiced calm that radiated authority. "What is the meaning of this disruption? We are on a flight schedule." Before anyone could answer, a man in a perfectly tailored dark suit hurried onto the plane. He was holding a leather portfolio and looked flustered. He walked directly to the elderly man. "Mr. Vance, sir," the man said, his voice full of deference. "My deepest apologies for the delay. The final papers from the board required your signature." He opened the portfolio. The name registered. Vance. As in Vance Aviation. As in the legendary, reclusive billionaire founder and owner of the entire airline. The man who owned the plane they were sitting on. The terminal they had just left. The company that employed every single person involved in this humiliating drama. A collective gasp went through the cabin. Caroline Preston's face, which had been flushed with rage, went completely, starkly white. The color drained from it as if a plug had been pulled. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her eyes were wide with dawning, sickening horror. "Mr. Vance?" she stammered, the name a choked whisper. "Elias Vance?" The security guard, Greg, looked from the old man to the new arrival to the pilot. His brain finally connected the dots. The hand on Lena's arm, which had been a grip of iron, suddenly felt like it was holding a burning coal. He snatched it back, as if he'd been electrocuted. His face went from smug to terrified in a single, breathtaking second. He began to tremble, a fine sweat breaking out on his forehead. Captain Ava Rostova's gaze sharpened. She looked at Mr. Vance, and a flicker of recognition and deep respect crossed her face. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice crisp and formal. "I was not aware you were on board. Forgive this intrusion." "It is not an intrusion, Captain," Mr. Vance said, his calm voice filling the stunned silence. "It is an education." He turned his piercing gaze first to Caroline Preston. "Madam," he began, and the word was an insult. "You seem to be under the impression that wealth gives you the right to be cruel. You are mistaken. You saw a human being in distress, and your first instinct was to heap scorn upon him. You saw another human being offer kindness, and you sought to have her destroyed." He paused, letting his words sink in. Caroline was shaking her head, trying to formulate a defense, an apology, anything. I didn't know. I had no idea it was you, sir." "And that is the entire problem, Mr. Vance said, his voice dropping to a glacial calm. "Your behavior should not depend on who you think a person is. This young woman," he said, gesturing to Lena, who was standing frozen, her mind reeling, "did not know who I was. She saw a man in pain, and she acted." She used her last few dollars to buy me a bottle of water. She saved my life. And you had her fired. You had her humiliated. Twice. His assistant, David Chen, stepped forward. Airport security and corporate affairs are on their way, sir. Excellent, Mr. Vance said. He looked at Caroline. Your lifetime platinum first-class membership with this airline is hereby revoked, permanently. You will be billed for the full cost of this flight delay. You will now disembark from my aircraft. Then, he turned to Greg. The guard was practically vibrating with fear. And you, Mr. Vance said, his voice laced with contempt. You work for a company hired to protect people, yet you used your authority to brutalize a woman who was committing an act of compassion. You are a disgrace to your uniform. You are fired. And I assure you, my legal team will be in contact with your employer. You will not work in a position of trust again. A team of suited airport officials boarded the plane. They looked from Captain Rostova to Mr. Vance and immediately understood the chain of command. One of them approached Caroline. Ma'am, you'll have to come with us. Caroline Preston finally broke. The facade of arrogant superiority shattered, revealing a sniveling, pathetic core. No, please, she begged, looking at Mr. Vance. It was a misunderstanding. I'm sorry. Please don't do this. Mr. Vance simply turned his back on her. Her pleas turned to sobs as she was firmly escorted off the plane, a public and ignominious exit. Another official took a stunned and silent Greg by the arm and led him away. Lena's former supervisor, Miller, who had been called to the gate, was informed in a short, brutal sentence by David Chen that his employment was also terminated, effective immediately. The cabin was silent, the remaining passengers watching with a mixture of shock and awe. Mr. Vance then turned his full attention to Lena. His expression softened, the hard edges melting away, replaced by a look of profound gratitude and concern. Miss Washington, he said, his voice gentle now. Are you all right? Lena couldn't speak. She could only nod, tears of shock and overwhelming relief finally streaming freely down her face. All the fear, the humiliation, the despair of the past few hours, of the past few months, was pouring out of her. Mr. Vance gestured to her seat. Please, sit down. He then turned to his assistant, David, the folder. David Chen handed the leather portfolio to him. But before Mr. Vance could speak, Captain Rostova stepped forward. She took the intercom microphone. Her voice boomed through the cabin, clear and unwavering. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. For those of you who just witnessed that disgraceful event, let me be perfectly clear. Vance Aviation has a zero-tolerance policy for prejudice, for bullying, and for the abuse of power. Miss Lena Washington is an honored guest on this flight. We will not be departing until she is comfortable and has confirmed she is ready to fly. This airline stands for decency. We stand with her. A single passenger began to clap, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire first-class cabin erupted in thunderous applause. It washed over Lena, a wave of validation and support that was the complete opposite of the silent, judgmental stares she had endured just minutes before. The sound was a balm on her wounded spirit. When the applause died down, Mr. Vance opened the folder. He looked at Lena, his eyes kind. Your mother was a very wise woman, Lena. You honor her with your actions. I have a rare heart condition. Without your quick thinking and your kindness, the doctors said I likely would not have survived the attack. I owe you a debt that I can never truly repay, but I would like to try. He slid a document out of the folder. I have spent the last few years wanting to create a charitable foundation focused on providing community care, support for the homeless, aid for those crushed by medical debt, assistance for people who fall through the cracks. The problem was, I could never find the right person to run it. Someone with intelligence, yes, but more importantly, with unimpeachable integrity and a compassionate heart. He looked directly into her eyes. I have found that person. I would like to offer you the position of Executive Director of the new Vance Foundation for Community Care. You will answer only to me. You will have a staff, an office, and a $5 million endowment to begin your work. The starting salary is $200,000 a year. Lena's world tilted on its axis. The numbers were meaningless, impossible. $200,000? $5 million? It was like a dream. She felt lightheaded. I don't know what to say. I'm a cleaner. You were a cleaner, Mr. Vance corrected gently. Now you are a philanthropist. What you are, fundamentally, is a good person. That is the only qualification that matters. David Chen stepped forward and handed her a long, blue check. Mr. Vance also insisted on this, he said with a small smile. A personal bonus, as a thank you for your compassion, and to reimburse you for the water. Lena looked down at the check. Her eyes scanned the numbers, but her brain refused to comprehend them. $500,000. $500,000. The number swam before her eyes. She thought of the $7.32. She thought of the eviction notice. She thought of the hole in her shoe. She began to laugh, a hysterical, tear-filled sound of pure, unadulterated disbelief and joy. And one more thing, David Chen added smoothly. We were made aware of your current housing situation. It has been handled. A 2-bedroom condominium downtown has been purchased in your name. It's fully furnished. The keys will be waiting for you upon your arrival in San Francisco, as will a car and a driver until you get settled. It was too much. The sheer, staggering scale of the reversal, from the depths of despair to this unbelievable height, was overwhelming. She put her head in her hands and sobbed, but these were not tears of pain. They were tears of catharsis, tears of release, tears that washed away months of fear and grief, leaving behind a raw, fragile, and beautiful hope. Mr. Vance simply waited patiently, giving her the space to feel it all. 6 months later. The California sun streamed through the large windows of the newly opened community center. It wasn't just any center. A polished bronze plaque by the entrance read, "The Eleanor Washington House of Kindness." Lena stood at a podium, looking out at a crowd of community leaders, volunteers, and people who, just like her 6 months ago, needed a helping hand. She was no longer wearing a worn uniform or simple jeans. She wore a tailored blue dress that radiated a quiet, confident authority. The haunted, weary look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a bright, determined light. My mother, Eleanor, was a nurse, Lena said, her voice steady and clear, amplified by the microphone. She believed that the most powerful medicine in the world was kindness. She taught me that your circumstances do not define your character. Your choices do. Today, we open this house not just as a place to find a warm meal or a safe bed, but as a testament to that belief. This is a house built on the principle that everyone deserves dignity, everyone deserves a second chance, and that kindness is the one thing we can all afford to give. The crowd applauded warmly. In the front row, Mr. Elias Vance smiled, looking more like a proud father than a billionaire benefactor. Beside him sat Captain Ava Rostova. The viral story of what happened on Flight 724 had prompted Vance Aviation to do more than just fire a few people. With Lena's input, they had created a revolutionary new company-wide training program. It was called the Washington Way, and Captain Rostova was now the vice president in charge of its implementation. It focused on empathy, de-escalation, and identifying vulnerable passengers, completely changing the culture of the airline. The downfall of her tormentors had been swift and total. Caroline Preston became a pariah. The video of her tirade on the plane, leaked by a passenger, had millions of views. Her high-powered consulting firm fired her for bringing the company into disrepute. Her husband, a prominent judge, filed for divorce, citing the public humiliation. She lost her career, her marriage, and her social standing in a matter of weeks. Ironic justice. Greg, the security guard, was fired and faced a civil lawsuit from Lena, the proceeds of which she immediately donated to a fund for legal aid. He was unemployable, a walking symbol of petty tyranny justly punished. After her speech, as Lena mingled with the guests, she saw a young woman lingering nervously by the door. She was clutching a worn-out resume. Her clothes were a little too big, and she had the same look of quiet desperation that Lena knew so well. She looked like she was about to lose her nerve and leave. Lena excused herself and walked over. "Hi," she said, her smile warm and genuine. "I'm Lena Washington. I'm glad you came today." The young woman started, looking flustered. "Oh, I just came to see. I'm looking for a job. Any job." "I know how that feels," Lena said softly. She took one of the woman's resumes. "What's your name?" "Maria," the woman whispered. "Well, Maria, we have an opening for an intake coordinator right here at the center. It requires a lot of compassion and a strong will to help others. I have a feeling you'd be perfect for it." Lena wrote her personal cell number on the back of a business card. "Call me on Monday. We'll set up an interview." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Really? You don't even know me." Lena smiled, and it was her mother's smile, full of warmth and understanding. "I know you're here, and I know you're trying. That's enough." She had passed it on, the gift she had been given. The cycle of kindness continued. As she watched Maria walk away, her step a little lighter, her shoulders a little straighter, Lena felt a profound sense of peace. She was no longer defined by her loss or her struggle. She was defined by her mother's legacy, a legacy she was now building, day by day, choice by choice. She had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the dignity you could restore to another human being. And in the quiet hum of the thriving community center, surrounded by the echoes of her mother's wisdom, Lena Washington knew with absolute certainty that she was the richest woman in the world. The world can be a cold, indifferent place. It can judge you by your clothes, by the color of your skin, by the balance in your bank account. But every now and then, a single act of kindness can ignite a revolution of the heart, proving that our true worth lies not in what we have, but in what we give.